he was my boss. But I want to confirm that it will in no way affect my judgment or involve any bias on my part in relating to him. And now I go to my question, with your permission, Honorable Chair. Professor Kindiki, as you know, the National Police Service recently reported that 13% of the police officers suffer from mental illness. I wish to ask that whether you have the view that the recruitment methodology should be changed to a more objective one, like having psychometric tests and having mental evaluation of the candidates, as opposed to the usual, checking their dental formation, their body structure, and so on. Never mind, it's not done professionally. So whether you think that is, what will you do about that when you hold this position? Will you change that? What are your views to transform this and to avoid the future problems of police shooting themselves and their colleagues? Thank you.
Professor, take a record. We take questions in 4 batches, or rather in batches of 4. Then you answer, then we take another batches of 4. So I'll ask the majority leader.
Thank you, Speaker. Apologies, I came a little bit late. I wasn't there for the introductions. My name is Kebani Shongwa, Member of Parliament for Kikuyu. Professor Kindiki, I see from your very good CV, you have a number of publications that you have published, and notably a lot to do with publications on the protection of rights. And my question will be based on some of those publications, Professor. And you will forgive me because your predecessor also came from academia like yourself. And we've seen him exercise power with a lot of hubris and a lot of arrogance, especially towards members of parliament, even in committees like this one. I would want to know, since you also come from academia and you're not a doctor yourself now, you're a full professor, are we going to witness the same hubris and arrogance, especially in dealing with leaders and other public officers? 2, in relation to those publications, you have witnessed the changes that have been done, especially at DCI, the management of certain units at DCI, which are blamed for the killing of Kenyans and what would almost tantamount to genocide. And I see you have publications on genocide. What are you going to do, if approved as CS in charge of the interior, to ensure that we shall never again in the history of our republic have to fish out bodies from River Yala or gather them from forests, from the Abadeas to Savo and elsewhere, in essence to end the gross violation of human rights of Kenyans through extrajudicial extermination, be they suspects of terrorism or whatever crimes, that you shall use your office to ensure that the rule of law prevails. 2 is on the Kenya Kwanza manifesto. There's a commitment to review the salary and welfare of police officers in all cadres, including their housing and other issues, including the issues that are being litigated in court on the question of graduate officers and reinstating their salaries to where they were before they were reduced. What steps do you intend to take to make sure that you improve the remuneration of officers across all cadres in the police force, and also to ensure that at least they live in habitable human settlements, not the kind of settlements we see our officers living in? That will be my take for now.
Yes, Opio and I.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor Kindiki, for starters, you as a legal scholar of no mean repute, I must admit, would perhaps be the best person to comment on this before I ask my other question. If you look at the Constitution, chapter 6 on leadership and integrity. And again, if you go to article 10 on national values and principles of governance, would you agree with me that the Constitution sets certain ethical and moral standards on leadership that have got nothing really to do with criminal culpability? In other words, when look at ethical and moral probity and criminal culpability, the two are perhaps mutually exclusive, because there's been a tendency for people to confuse the two, that for you to be disqualified to hold a public office, you must have been charged in a court of law and perhaps convicted. Yet the Constitution, in its letter and spirit, doesn't really call for that. It's really, maybe comment on that before you answer my other question, which is on the small matter of an inquiry by the Public Accounts Committee in the year 2015. That was in the 11th Parliament, I think. Later on in the 12th Parliament, I became chair of PAC in the National Assembly for 5 years, and therefore this information came to my knowledge. Now, there was this matter that touched on your law firm, whereby some payments that were proceeds from the NYS scandal then. A scandal that cost taxpayers about 1.6 billion Kenya shillings. Some payment was said to have been made to your law firm from a company that was at the heart or at the center of this scandal. A company going by the name Out of the Box Solutions. Or later on, there's also some further payment from that same company. The initial payment was 500,000 shillings. The second payment was 15 million Kenya shillings. That went through your law firm under not very clear circumstances, if I may call them so. Or perhaps now that you are set, or you intend to, if approved by the House, to occupy one of the most critical dockets, which will be in charge of the instruments of violence controlled by the state. It will be important for you to clear this matter so that you can start on a clean state. Thank you.
Robert Mboy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This docket that the nominee has been nominated to is extremely important, considering, of course, it deals with national security. Now, I have two things I would like to confirm. First, there is an observation I want to make that in the run-up to the last general election, you were one of those that were vying to be a running mate in the Kenya Kwanza coalition. And that is in public domain. And you really fought hard. Up to the last minute when a decision was taken that was not in your favor. Now, after that, there were comments that you made publicly, and one of them was actually an implication that you are going to go on some kind of sabbatical leave, but we can see you're already actively involved now in service to the nation. Have you recovered from that shock, and are you going to be very comfortable working under your competitor, because whoever you're competing against is now the deputy president? And secondly, do you think the president has any right or should interfere with the operations of the DCI? Because you know recently that he did disband a unit that operates under them. Thank you.
Professor, those are four. You can now proceed to respond.
Thank you, Chair. On the first question from Deputy Speaker, the Honorable Shalay, I would like to respond by saying that yes, it is important for psychometric tests to be carried out on recruits. However, I do not think that the problem that we are experiencing around mental illness is connected with the type of recruits that get into the police service. I believe the issues around mental illness in the police service are linked to work-related stress. In this connection, if I am approved by this Honorable House and appointed by the President subsequently, I intend to equip, expand, and fully capitalize the wellness and counseling unit, which I intend to link with the soon to be established Kenya Police Hospital, the Kenya Police Service Hospital, and the Kenya Prison Service Hospital, two projects which are at an advanced stage and should be operational within the next few months. If you have those hospitals in place and are functioning, well-equipped, well-human resourced wellness and counseling unit, you will be able to prevent cases of a psychiatric nature that lead to mental illness and sometimes fatal accidents involving police officers and their families. Secondly, I believe that these incidents are caused by the low morale and also the low remuneration and poor working conditions of police officers vis-a-vis the risks that they undertake in the service of the nation. And to finalize on that, I'll combine it with one of the questions that was raised by the Honorable Leader of Majority, which is to say, I intend to vigorously fight for the welfare and improved terms of service for police officers as well as prison officers because of the critical nature of the role they play in securing our country. I know the current administration has committed in its manifesto to review the terms and other welfare issues, including housing and mortgages. I will be the #1 champion to have that part of the manifesto implemented fully so that you can instill better morale, better working conditions, and a happier Kenya Police Service, a happier Kenya Prison Service. Secondly, Honorable Speaker, the Honorable Leader of Majority asked me whether I would be proud and arrogant. The answer is no. I believe that the ultimate trait of leadership is humility. And most people tend to confuse humility with cowardice. The two are not related. We'll be humble. We'll submit ourselves to all authorities, starting with the appointing authority, His Excellency the President, my colleagues, but also arms of government, including this House. And I say this with a bit of pride because I've been a member of one of the Houses of Parliament for 10 years. I do appreciate and recognize the critical role that Parliament plays in oversighting the executive and also pushing for accountability within government. I will remain a servant not only of this country but also of the institutions that have been set up under our constitution and our law so that I can effectively discharge my mandate as Cabinet Secretary for the Interior and National Administration. I'll obey summons and invites and comply with all directions of Parliament and relate well with my now former colleagues because it is a symbiotic relationship, and the services we offer from the executive, from the legislature, from the judiciary are services to make our country better and they are symbiotic and related. I will not be proud. I'll be humble, but extremely firm, because this docket is extremely sensitive, and all the other sectors of the nation rely on a safe country. So humility should not be mistaken for cowardice. I'll be extremely firm and ruthless with the wrong people, because 99% of our people are law-abiding. The 1% that are lawbreakers, will be extremely ruthless with them, and we will speak very little about or with them, and will act decisively, ruthlessly, to ensure our nation is secure. Honorable Speaker, Chairman, the third question on Chapter 6 raised, I think also the Majority Leader had asked about salaries. I have answered that question, and welfare. The Leader of Minority, the Honorable Pio Wandai, asked about Chapter 6 vis-a-vis its place in the Constitution. It is true that Chapter 6 behoves on state and public officers to exercise the highest levels of integrity and to refrain from any conduct that may put the office which they serve in public odium or ridicule. It is also true that our Constitution in other parts, the same Constitution in other chapters, requires that persons who are accused of committing crimes must be taken through due process before any punishment or action is taken against them. Therefore, it is my view that there is no contradiction between the values, the very high moral standards that are anticipated under Chapter 6, and the very particular requirements of due process and fair trial, which are provided in other parts of the Constitution. This is my take. That Chapter 6 was intentionally left that way, so that on the one hand, we have a moral imperative where public officers can exercise their conscience, and even when the law does not demand, they can even leave office or step aside, or even retire or resign from office based on their conscience. And I think it's not an idle chapter, because I think in this country increasingly it will be very difficult for people who do not meet the moral and ethical standards that are set in our Constitution to operate. So that chapter is there. But on the other hand, there are the bedrock principles of criminal justice and human rights that require that if you accuse someone of committing a crime, it is important that due process first is carried out, because the danger of people using the instruments of state to accuse others falsely is extremely, extremely likely. And people can abuse the criminal justice system just to accuse other people, get them out of the way, and then achieve what they wanted. So that balance must continue to exist in our view, in our Constitution. It is not contradictory, it is complementary. On the question of my law firm, I would like to respond as follows. With regard to the PSC report, which has been referred to by the Honorable Pio Wandai, I have practiced law for 22 years. I have never been involved in any professional misconduct whatsoever. With regard to the report which he is talking about, reference was made to a payment which was made to my law firm of 500,000 shillings. That payment was not made by any company, leave alone a company that supplied NYS. It was made by a friend of mine and a colleague called Onesmus Kipchumba Murkomen. And this is the story. Onesmus Kipchumba Murkomen owed me 500,000 shillings, which I had lent him. and I went and asked him to pay me back, and he wrote me a check. That's it. Period. As to the 15 million shillings of the Honorable Pio Wandai is saying, I am not aware. I think he's confusing my law firm with another law firm. I'm very clear. I am extremely clear. And I would like him to clarify, Mr. Speaker, because this is a public process. I don't want to live here with Kenyans imagining that I obtained 15 million shillings from the proceeds of crime. 500,000 shillings, was I paid? Yes. By out of the box? No. By Onesmus Kipchumba Murkomen, who owed me a friendly loan of 500,000 shillings, because at that time we were borrowing money from each other, which happens among colleagues. I'm sure even these MPs, they owe each other some money. So that is the short story around that issue. Mr. Chairman, on the final issue on the running mate, the question raised by the member for Matungulu, Kathiani, or Matungulu this side, Kathiani this side. Now, first, it is not true that I fought so hard to be a running mate. That is not true. What is true, Mr. Chairman, is that I was fortunate to be on the short list of 6 members of my party who were being considered to be running mates for President William Ruto. In that short list, it is also true that I ended up being a runners-up. It is also true that in that process, the Honorable Rigathi Gachagua, who is now Deputy President of Kenya, was nominated to be a running mate, and I was the runners-up. That bit is true. With regard to the question whether I've recovered from the shock, there was no shock, because in the first instance there was no entitlement to anything. You can only get shocked if you're entitled to something. It was a privilege even to be on that short list, and even a greater privilege to have been a runners-up. It is also true, Chairman, that I did a press conference 2 days later after that process, and I said 2 things, namely that I'll take a break from elective politics, which I did, and 2, that I will not be available for any appointive office during my break. That last bit, I have since reviewed that position after persuasion by my party. My party persuaded me, and in fact, if the honorable member cared to listen to that speech, I said, however, notwithstanding my personal decision, if my party wishes to engage me and requires me to reconsider my position, I'll be willing to listen. So that is what made me to change my mind. Otherwise, it is true what he has said, but there was no shock. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I have no problem submitting to authority. That is the easiest thing. And therefore, my friend Rigathi Gachagua, who is now the Deputy President of Kenya, is my boss. And I have no problem whatsoever working with him and under him, together with President Uhuru Kenyatta, together with President William Ruto. Uhuru Kenyatta is the former president of Kenya. I also served under him very well until he threw me out for no reason. So I'll be more than happy to serve under President William Ruto, Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua, all my colleagues, all arms of government, and I'll be a humble servant of Kenya, the people of Kenya, and there is no shock, there is no nothing, there is nothing
to discuss.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
The next batch of 4, Owen Bayer, Shurie,